I had the right of way, sister. I was coming right down the center of the road. Right down the center, in plain sight. You just couldn't miss me.
In 1963, she became a global sensation. A nun whose voice touched millions and topped the charts worldwide. But 2 decades later, the same fame that made her famous would destroy her. Buried under crushing debt, abandoned by the people who once celebrated her, and desperate to reclaim a life that had slipped away, she made one final attempt to save herself.
Have you an E, Sister Clooney?
No, you have to get along with an A.
Are you ready?
It didn't go as planned. What happened to the singing nun in her final years is a story of betrayal, heartbreak, and a tragic ending that still haunts those who remember her voice. The Nun Who Shocked America. Jean-Paul Marie Deckers was born in Brussels, Belgium, on October 17, 1933. She grew up in a family that owned a local pastry shop and attended a Catholic school in the city. Her mother often described her as a bit of a tomboy, so she was delighted when Jean joined the Guides Catholiques, the Belgian Girl Scouts. By the age of 15, Jean became convinced that she was destined to become a nun. Around that same time, she threw herself into scouting and bought her very first guitar, spending evenings playing songs around campfires. Without realizing it, those simple performances were laying the foundation for a career that would eventually reach millions of people around the world. After finishing high school, Jeanne spent 3 years earning a diploma that qualified her to teach sculpture. Even while studying, she seriously considered dedicating her life to the Catholic Church. Between 1954 and 1959, she worked as a sculpture teacher, guiding young children while continuing to wrestle with the idea of entering a convent. Everything changed during the summer of 1959. While attending a Girl Scout camp, the 21-year-old Jean met 16-year-old Annie Péchet. That meeting marked the beginning of a relationship that would have a lasting impact on both of their lives. According to several accounts, Annie quickly formed a deep emotional attachment to Jeanne, although Jeanne did not immediately share those feelings. Not long afterward, Jeanne found herself at a crossroads, struggling with questions about her own identity while also trying to escape the pressure of her controlling parents. She made a life-changing decision. Following a broken engagement that left her emotionally shattered, she entered the missionary Dominican Sisters of Our Lady of Fishermont in September 1959, taking the religious name Sister Luc Gabriel. For the first time, she felt like she truly belonged somewhere. Music had always been part of her life, and the convent allowed her to keep playing her guitar. Even though she quickly gained a reputation for being rebellious inside the strict religious community, she never stopped performing. She entertained fellow sisters with her songs, and before long, members of the local community were attending her small concerts as well. During her years at the convent, Jeanne wrote a steady stream of original music. Like B.B. King named his famous guitar Lucille and Eric Clapton had Blackie, Jean also gave her own guitar a name, Sister Adele. It became her constant companion as she performed for the other nuns, who adored her songs. Her talent impressed the convent's leaders so much that they encouraged her to record an album that visitors could purchase. It soon became obvious that her music appealed not only to religious audiences, but to ordinary listeners as well. While those recordings were being made, one particular song caught the attention of executives at Philips Records. It was a cheerful hymn celebrating Saint Dominic, the founder of the Dominican order. The record company immediately recognized the unusual appeal of a singing nun and offered Jeanne a recording contract. Religious recordings were nothing new. Churches and choirs had released albums for years, but the executives at Philips believed Sister Luc Gabriel offered something different. They felt her soft folk melodies and gentle voice had the potential to reach mainstream audiences, not just churchgoers. They believed she could become a genuine pop star. Before releasing her music, however, one important condition had to be met. Jean's Mother Superior insisted that she could not use her real name. For marketing purposes, the record label introduced her to the world as Sœur Sourire, meaning Sister Smile. Ironically, Jean disliked the name from the very beginning. Anyone watching old television appearances could see that the nickname never really suited her. Behind her thick glasses, she usually appeared serious and reserved rather than constantly cheerful. If she had been given the choice, she would have preferred using her old Girl Scout nickname, Bear Cub. Still, she accepted the decision and moved forward. Soon afterward, she recorded Dominique, a song celebrating the founder of her religious order. The Dominique mentioned in the song was Dominic de Guzman, the Spanish priest who founded the Order of Preachers, better known today as the Dominican Order. To understand the song's subject, it helps to understand the period in which Dominic lived. In 1179, the Roman Catholic Church formally established the Inquisition to combat religious movements it considered heretical, including the Albigensians, also known as the Cathars, in southern France. After the Dominican Order was founded in 1215, responsibility for administering much of the Inquisition was placed in its hands, a system that continued for centuries. Over time, Dominican friars developed methods of investigation, interrogation, and punishment while working alongside civil authorities to eliminate groups they considered heretics. During later centuries, these same systems were also used against early Protestant movements. Looking closely at the English translation of Dominique reveals that Jean's lyrics praise Saint Dominic for confronting the Albigensians and defending the Catholic faith as it was understood by the Church. His influence extended beyond the Inquisition. Tradition also credits Dominic with promoting devotion to the Rosary, after reportedly receiving it through a vision of the Virgin Mary. The Dominican order played a major role in spreading that practice throughout the Catholic world, where it eventually became one of the faith's most recognizable traditions. The lyrics themselves were unlike anything dominating popular music at the time. Rather than singing about romance or heartbreak, Jean told the story of a religious figure traveling across Europe, preaching the gospel and tirelessly fighting what the Church considered heresy. Critics, however, pointed out that the song presented only one side of the historical story. American humorist Joe Queenan later argued that while the lyrics portrayed Saint Dominic as a humble servant of God, history also linked his order to the institution that eventually carried out the Spanish Inquisition. American audiences, though, were focused on something entirely different. Most listeners could not understand the French lyrics at all. Instead, they were drawn to the song's warm melody, simple arrangement, and comforting tone. Its timing also played a major role. Just weeks after the assassination of President John F. Kennedy, many people were searching for music that offered a sense of peace and reassurance. Compared to louder surf rock hits like Wipe Out by the Surfaris, Dominique felt calm, gentle, and almost comforting. Meanwhile, the song developed an unexpected reputation in French-speaking countries. According to some accounts, the word nique carried a slang, meaning that gave the title an unintended double meaning. Whether that rumor actually influenced listeners remains uncertain, but it certainly became part of the song's unusual story. Whatever the reason, Dominique exploded into an international sensation. In the United Kingdom, it climbed to number 4 on the charts. In the United States, beginning on December 7, 1963, it stayed at number 1 for 4 consecutive weeks, becoming America's Christmas number 1 that year. Its success had another surprising consequence. By holding on to the top spot, Dominique kept the Kingsmen's classic Louie Louie from ever reaching #1. Jean also accomplished something no artist had managed before in American chart history. At the same time, she held both the #1 single and the #1 album in the country, with each selling more than 1 million copies. Looking back, the achievement almost seems impossible. A Catholic nun singing in French about a medieval saint somehow became one of America's biggest pop stars. The song was eventually re-recorded in English, French, Dutch, German, Hebrew, Japanese, Korean, and Portuguese, while the accompanying album, Her Joys, Her Songs, sold nearly 2 million copies worldwide. With nothing more than her voice and an acoustic guitar, Jeanne created a sound that stood in sharp contrast to the rising wave of rock music, led by bands like the Beatles and the Rolling Stones. Yet for a brief moment in 1963 and 1964, her simple folk tune captivated millions across the globe. Many listeners embraced the song without knowing the historical background behind its subject. To some critics, Dominique celebrated a religious figure whose order later became closely associated with the Inquisition, an institution that remains one of the most controversial chapters in church history. Others also criticized the wider Roman Catholic system, arguing that convent life reflected theological beliefs they strongly rejected. As Jeanne's popularity continued to grow, television soon came calling. She appeared on The Ed Sullivan Show on January 5, 1964, introducing her to an even larger American audience. Dominique later won the Grammy Award for Best Gospel or Religious Song, cementing its place in music history. But behind the scenes, life was becoming increasingly complicated. A significant portion of the royalties from her music went directly to the Dominican convent, which used the money to support missionary work. Church leaders also exercised considerable control over her career, encouraging her to maintain an image that was always cheerful, optimistic, and uplifting. For Jeanne, that public image became harder and harder to carry. As her private mental health struggles grew more severe, the constant expectation that she remain smiling and joyful created an emotional conflict that slowly became almost impossible to bear. The success that broke her. By 1966, Jeanne's extraordinary rise to fame had become the stuff of Hollywood. Her story inspired a major motion picture, The Singing Nun, with legendary actress Debbie Reynolds playing the lead role. The film even paired her character with a romantic storyline alongside actor Chad Everett, turning the quiet Belgian nun into a larger-than-life screen heroine. It also marked a remarkable first in pop culture, as one chart-topping artist was being portrayed in a biopic by another chart-topping star. The real Jeanne, however, saw things very differently. She dismissed the movie as little more than fiction. While the film did capture the struggle of a woman trying to balance the rigid rules of convent life with the overwhelming pressure of sudden fame, Hollywood polished away much of the complexity. In the movie, cheerful nuns happily sang an English version of Dominique, transforming it into an uplifting tune that anyone could sing along to. Gone were the original references to fighting heresy. The darker historical context had been stripped away, leaving behind a much safer and more family-friendly story. The film itself was never considered a cinematic masterpiece, even with respected actress Greer Garson playing the Mother Superior. But it accomplished something far more important. It cemented Jeanne's image as an international superstar. That level of fame quickly became overwhelming. After appearing on American television and becoming recognizable around the world, she found herself surrounded by constant attention. Admirers flooded her with flowers, letters, and increasingly personal messages. For someone who had chosen the quiet life of a convent, the sudden obsession from strangers felt deeply unsettling. Jeanne later admitted that the pressure became so intense she feared she was heading toward a nervous breakdown. Even receiving awards became emotionally exhausting. At one American pop music ceremony, her reaction shocked everyone. Instead of celebrating, she reportedly threw up her hands in horror. Looking back years later, she said receiving the award had felt less like an honor and more like being handed a bomb. As quickly as the world had embraced her, it moved on. After Dominique, none of her new songs came close to repeating that incredible success. Each release attracted less attention than the one before. But Jeanne wasn't the only thing changing. Popular music itself was changing just as fast. The cheerful folk sound that had carried her to the top was being pushed aside by the explosive rise of rock and roll. Back at the convent, the emotional toll became impossible to ignore. Jeanne slipped into a deep depression. She longed for the peaceful, sheltered life she had once known. But the convent she returned to no longer felt like home. Instead of welcoming her back, many of the sisters viewed her fame with jealousy. Gossip spread through the halls, and the warmth she once experienced gradually disappeared. At the same time, life outside the convent had changed her in ways she hadn't fully realized. Adjusting to the strict routine of religious life became increasingly difficult. She enrolled in university courses, began wearing lipstick, and was even seen smoking. Small acts that reflected how much she had changed during her years in the public eye. In many ways, Jeanne was living between two completely different worlds. One part of her still belonged to the disciplined, deeply religious life of the convent. The other had experienced the freedom and attention of the secular entertainment industry. Trying to satisfy both worlds became impossible. Her superiors eventually concluded that she was becoming a bad influence on the other sisters. They isolated her from the rest of the convent, and by 1966, her time there came to an end. Jeanne later insisted that leaving had not been her own decision, but the result of serious disagreements with church leadership. Even after walking away from the convent, she never abandoned many of the habits that had shaped her life. She continued to think of herself as a nun, prayed several times each day, and maintained a simple, disciplined lifestyle. Then her personal life took another unexpected turn. She moved in with Annie Pescher, the young woman she had first met years earlier at Scout Camp. By then, the two had reconnected after Jeanne attended theology classes at the University of Louvain in 1963. Their friendship steadily grew stronger, and Annie eventually relocated so they could remain close. Throughout Jeanne's final years at the convent, Annie became a regular visitor, and after Jeanne left religious life, they shared a home together. Although their living arrangement conflicted with traditional Catholic expectations, both women remained deeply devoted to their faith. They even built a small altar inside their apartment and continued praying and receiving communion together. Yet their relationship had its own challenges. Friends later described Annie as deeply protective and possessive, with one person remarking that Jeanne ultimately enjoyed less personal freedom than she had experienced inside the convent. As Jeanne watched the Catholic Church struggle with major reforms during the 1960s, she became increasingly frustrated by what she viewed as its slow pace of change. Rather than staying silent, she used her music to express her views. In 1967, she released a song supporting contraception titled "Glory Be to God for the Golden Pill." The decision sparked immediate controversy. To many people, it represented a modern attempt to engage with changing social attitudes. To others, it crossed a line that should never have been crossed. The Catholic Church was already undergoing enormous changes following the reforms of the Second Vatican Council, and debates about tradition, authority, and modern culture were dividing Catholics around the world. Some believed those reforms would strengthen the Church by helping it connect with modern society. Others argued they weakened centuries of established teaching. In later decades, studies from organizations such as the Pew Research Center documented significant declines in religious participation across many Western countries, though historians continue to debate the many factors behind those changes. Even Pope Paul VI publicly expressed concern about the direction the Church was taking, famously remarking that the smoke of Satan had entered the Church. For Jean, the growing tension between her personal beliefs and the institution she once devoted her life to was only becoming more painful. The release of her song supporting contraception proved to be the breaking point. Her relationship with the Catholic Church deteriorated rapidly, and the fallout reached beyond religion. Philip's Records dropped her from its roster and, adding another devastating blow, legally prevented her from performing under the names Sœur Sourire or the Singing Nun. Determined to continue making music, Jeanne returned to using her birth name while also performing under the stage name Luc Dominique, since her original identity now belonged to the record company. The late 1960s were a time of enormous social change, and Jeanne tried to reinvent herself. She embraced feminist themes, protest music, and more outspoken songwriting, hoping to separate herself from the image that had made her famous. The public, however, never followed. Her new material struggled to find an audience. She later released an album titled I Am Not a Star in Heaven, an unmistakable statement that distanced her from her former image. One song was even called Sister Smile is Dead. Alongside those more provocative tracks, the album also included religious songs and music for children. Despite her efforts, the project failed commercially. Whether it was because listeners no longer recognized her, the music industry had changed, or audiences simply associated her forever with Dominique, the album disappeared with little attention. Jeanne believed the biggest obstacle was losing her famous stage name. In her view, people ignored the record simply because they had no idea who the artist was. A few years later, another opportunity appeared. In 1973, she became involved with the Catholic Charismatic Renewal movement. Belgian Cardinal Leo Joseph Suenens personally invited her to write music for the movement, giving her career a brief revival. She even traveled to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where she performed before crowds numbering in the thousands. Encouraged by that response, she released another album in 1979, this time using the English translation of her old stage name, Sister Smile. She described the record as a collection of honest religious songs that would finally allow people to understand who she truly was. Once again, hope faded quickly. A planned Canadian tour collapsed after audiences in Quebec reacted negatively to some of her newer material, particularly songs that criticized aspects of Catholicism. Several venues canceled scheduled performances, ending the comeback almost before it had begun. Long before that tour, Jeanne had already started exploring other creative paths. In 1968, she published a book of inspirational poetry, hoping to build a career outside of music. Like several of her later albums, the book attracted little public attention. Gradually, she stepped away from the spotlight altogether. Together with Annie Pachet, she helped establish a school for autistic children, dedicating herself to helping families instead of chasing another hit record. Annie remained by her side throughout this new chapter, becoming her closest companion for the next decade. But beneath the surface, Jeanne's life was unraveling. Financial problems mounted. Paparazzi followed her relentlessly. Newspapers became obsessed with rumors surrounding the former nun living with another woman, and tabloids eagerly sensationalized every aspect of their relationship. The constant scrutiny pushed Jeanne into a deep depression. The heartbreaking downfall and death of the Singing Nun and her husband. By the end of the 1970s, Jean Deckers found herself facing a crisis she never saw coming. The Belgian Ministry of Finance informed her that she owed more than $60,000 in unpaid taxes from the enormous success of Dominique years earlier. The demand left her stunned. During her time at the Fischermont convent, Jean had taken a vow of poverty. As far as she was concerned, every cent she earned as the Singing Nun had gone directly to the convent. She had never kept receipts or financial records because she never imagined she would one day have to prove where the money went. That decision would come back to haunt her. By then, her relationship with the Dominican order had completely fallen apart. Since leaving the convent in 1967, she had become estranged from the sisters, leaving her with almost no support when she needed it most. Jean argued that she should not be personally responsible for taxes on income she never actually received. She appealed to both the convent and Philip's records, hoping they would help resolve the dispute. Eventually, the convent agreed to give her what they described as her share of the earnings. The amount was only enough to purchase a modest apartment in Wavre. Even then, the money came with conditions. Jean had to stop publicly criticizing the congregation and sign documents confirming that all financial matters between them had been settled. Philip's records, meanwhile, offered no assistance at all. Despite reportedly keeping the vast majority of the revenue generated by her music, the company left Jean to deal with the tax battle on her own. The legal fight drained what little financial stability she had left. At the same time, her personal struggles were becoming increasingly severe. She was already battling anxiety, relying on prescribed medication, and drinking heavily. Annie Péchet later described those years as a series of one nervous breakdown after another. Then came the final setback. In 1982, Jean lost her last appeal against the Belgian tax authorities. The ruling meant she now faced the possibility of imprisonment if she failed to pay the outstanding debt. Running out of options, she made one last attempt to save herself the only way she knew how. She returned to music. Hoping to recreate the success that had once changed her life, Jean recorded a new version of Dominique. But this time, everything felt different. The innocence and charm that had captivated the world in 1963 were gone. The promotional video showed a far older and visibly weary Jeanne walking through the ruins of an old abbey, wearing a turtleneck sweater and her familiar bowl-cut hairstyle. The updated arrangement replaced the simple acoustic folk sound with heavily produced synthesizers that reflected the popular Europop trends of the early 1980s. Instead of launching a comeback, the recording became a painful reminder that the music world had moved on. It was difficult to imagine who the intended audience was supposed to be. Most record buyers at the time were teenagers, while Jean's image remained firmly tied to an earlier generation. Unsurprisingly, the single attracted almost no attention and quickly disappeared. Even as unpaid taxes, legal costs, and declining mental health continued to weigh on her, Jean kept fighting for several more years. Then came the moment that finally broke her. She realized that her growing financial problems would likely force the closure of the school for autistic children that she and Annie had worked so hard to build together. For Jean, it was simply too much to bear. On March 29, 1985, police entered a home in Wavre, Belgium, where they discovered the bodies of 52-year-old Jean Deckers and Annie Péchet. According to reports from the time, both women had died from an overdose of sedatives. Jean left behind a note describing years of emotional exhaustion brought on by financial struggles, legal battles with the Belgian government, and the overwhelming pressure of trying to keep their school alive. In their joint farewell message, the couple made it clear that their worsening financial situation had played a central role in their decision. They also expressed one final wish: to be buried together according to the traditions of the Catholic Church. Alongside the note were deeply personal letters they had written to one another, expressing gratitude for years of unwavering loyalty and companionship. Throughout her life, Jeanne had consistently denied claims that she and Annie were romantically involved, insisting that their relationship was rooted in faith and friendship. However, biographers later argued that Jeanne's personal diaries suggested their bond eventually became romantic. In Annie's farewell message, she wrote that they were entering eternity in peace and trusted that God, who had witnessed their suffering, would show them mercy. She also expressed the hope that Jeanne would be remembered kindly after enduring so much hardship during her lifetime. Even in their final moments, both women emphasized that they had never abandoned their faith. Their final request remained unchanged: to rest side by side and receive a Catholic funeral. On April 4, 1985, Jeanne Deckers and Annie Péchet were buried together at Cheremont Cemetery in Wavre. Their shared gravestone bears a line taken from one of Jeanne's own songs, which translates to, "I saw her soul fly through the clouds." It remains one of the most touching reminders of the life they shared. Yet perhaps the cruelest twist in Jeanne's entire story happened on the very day she died. Without her knowledge, the Belgian organization responsible for collecting music royalties had processed a payment in her name. The amount was approximately $300,000, or more than 570,000 Belgian francs. No one can say whether that money would have changed the outcome. Jeanne had been struggling not only with financial problems, but also with years of emotional pain and declining mental health. Still, the timing remains one of the most heartbreaking coincidences in her story. Over the years, Jeanne's life has come to mean different things to different people. Many within the LGBTQ+ community, particularly those navigating deeply religious backgrounds, have embraced her as a symbol of the painful conflict that can exist between personal identity and faith. Interest in her life continued long after her death. Biographers across Europe and North America explored her remarkable journey, while novelists, playwrights, and filmmakers found inspiration in her story. One of the most unusual adaptations arrived in 1996 with the off-Broadway production The Tragic and Horrible Life of the Singing Nun, which premiered at the Grove Street Playhouse. Written and directed by Blair Fell, the play took enormous creative liberties with Jeanne's life. Fell openly acknowledged that the production was largely fictional. The story transformed its main character into a deeply repressed woman, surrounded by exaggerated, provocative versions of convent life, blending satire, dark comedy, and sexual themes that had little connection to the historical record. The production also featured playful appearances by fictional religious figures inspired by popular culture, including characters reminiscent of the Flying Nun and The Sound of Music. While the show aimed for outrageous comedy, critics were divided over whether it successfully balanced humor with the tragedy of Jeanne's real life. A decade later, Jeanne's story returned to the stage once again. In 2006, a musical adaptation of Fell's play premiered at the New York Musical Theater Festival. Produced by George DeMarco and David Gerard, who had also worked on the original production, the new version featured Laura Daniel in the lead role. Her performance earned the festival's Outstanding Individual Performance Award. The musical included songs by Andy Monroe, with the script once again written by Blair Fell and directed by Michael Shirali, ensuring that Jeanne Decker's extraordinary and deeply tragic story continued to find new audiences long after her voice had fallen silent.